Once again, everyone told an old veteran to stay far, far away. But after years of sleeping in his truck, he risked every last dollar, 700 bucks, to buy a forgotten Cold War bunker buried beneath the winter hills of Rapid City. He thought it would finally give him peace, until his loyal German shepherd began growling at a hollow wall. Behind it lay a sealed chamber untouched for decades, and what they uncovered wasn't meant for the eyes of any living soul, because some secrets were buried to protect the greedy, not the innocent. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from your city, state, or country. It means the world to see how far these stories of courage and second chances can travel. Winter pressed its cold lips against Rapid City, South Dakota, turning every breath into silver mist and every memory into something that stung. Henry Walker sat hunched behind the wheel of his battered pickup, the engine coughing like an old man fighting against time. He wore his thick red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket, faded at the elbows, frayed around the cuffs, a loyal garment that had seen war heartbreak and the long, lonely winters that followed him home. Henry was a man in his early 60s, face carved by decades of hard-living deep lines, etched along his brow and around his mouth. Gray beard scattered like frost along a jaw that had clenched through too many battles. One ear had a slight dent from shrapnel that once whistled past him in a desert far away, and his left eye always seemed to search the edges of the world, alert for dangers long gone. His hands, wide and calloused, clenched the steering wheel as though letting go might make the last sliver of his life slip away. Beside him, perched proudly on the torn passenger seat, was Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur and a muscular build that spoke of agility and strength. Max's amber eyes shimmered with intelligence and loyalty, always watching Henry like a soldier looking to his commanding officer for the next move. His ears stood sharp and ready, though his tail would gently tap whenever Henry glanced at him. He was a creature built for protection and companionship, a grounding presence for a man who had lost too much of both. For months, Henry and Max had drifted like tumbleweeds through the Midwest, picking up odd jobs and sleeping under tattered tarps in the truck bed or in dusty motel rooms when luck allowed. Henry spent years working construction, hauling junk from scrapyards, and delivering firewood to strangers, anything to keep just enough fuel in the tank and kibble in Max's bowl. But winter was unforgiving, and Rapid City's cold gnawed at bones and hope alike. Henry felt it deep inside, the dread of another night curled up in the cab while Max shivered beneath a blanket. That was when he saw the listing. A cracked phone screen, a flickering connection at a roadside diner, and a headline that felt too absurd to ignore: Cold War bunker, $700, must sell northern outskirts Rapid City. Henry blinked, wondering if exhaustion had made a joke out of his eyesight. $700 was nearly everything he had stuffed inside the glove compartment in a wrinkled envelope. But a bunker. A bunker meant walls thicker than his nightmares, a roof that winter's claws couldn't tear apart. Silence. Safety. A chance, small and stupid maybe, but a chance at a quiet life. He swallowed hard. "What do you think, Max?" "A bunker for two." Max answered by nudging Henry's arm with his nose, letting out a soft, hopeful whine. That settled it. By afternoon, Henry was pushing open the glass door of the local legal office downtown. Inside was Sarah Jennings, a sharp-featured woman in her early 40s with auburn hair neatly twisted into a bun. Sarah stood tall, almost 5'8", with a slender frame beneath a charcoal wool coat. Her dark brown eyes had the quick analytical movement of someone who could spot a lie before the speaker finished breathing. She had spent years dealing with overdue taxes and property issues, and her tone was always brisk but not unkind, like someone who had long ago learned how to separate emotions from tired paperwork. When Henry told her which listing he'd come for, she looked up slowly, studying the man before her. The worn flannel jacket, the faded jeans, the weather-beaten boots that carried more miles than she could count. "You're buying the Montgomery bunker?" she asked, tapping her pen against the desk. "It's been abandoned since the late 70s. No power, no water, limited access." Henry gave a thin smile, voice steady but low. "I'm not picky." Sarah's expression softened for a brief moment. Perhaps she recognized the quiet desperation in his voice or the weight in his eyes that belonged to men who'd lived through too much. "Well, if it's shelter you need," she said, sliding a yellow folder forward, "this'll do better than most things for $700. Papers were signed. Bills were counted. And just like that, Henry Walker owned a bunker. In the fading light of afternoon, he and Max followed the printed directions miles north of town. The road narrowed until it felt like the world itself was shrinking around them. Snow fell in lazy spirals, covering the ground in a soft white blanket. Pines huddled close like silent sentinels. The pickup rolled to a stop before a clearing dusted with frost and loneliness. In the center lay a concrete slab embedded into the earth 10 feet across, worn and cracked by time. A rusted iron hatch sat flush with the ground, its heavy wheel locked into place like a clenched fist around forgotten secrets. Henry approached slowly, breath fogging in front of him. He crouched and brushed the frost from the wheel, feeling the cold bite into his gloves. He whispered, "A real bunker," almost laughing at how surreal it felt. Max sniffed around the edges, tail low but curious. Then with a decisive bark, he announced his approval as though saying, "We've slept in worse, haven't we?" Henry huffed a quiet laugh, chest warming slightly despite the cold. "Yeah, boy, we sure have." He pressed his palm flat against the hatch. This wasn't much. Barely anything at all. But it was his. The bunker, like him, was old, wounded, forgotten, and still standing. A gust of wind blew across the clearing, rocking the treetops, whispering through the cracks of the hatch, like distant voices beneath the ground. Max's ears flicked alert for anything unseen. Henry felt a familiar twinge in his chest, the old panic trying to claw its way into him from the past. Too many nights hiding behind walls. Too many mornings waking up wondering if peace was a fairy tale soldiers told themselves. He forced a slow exhale, grounding himself in the feel of the cold metal and the solid earth beneath him. "We got this," he murmured. "It's just us now, you and me." Max pressed against his leg, warm and alive, a reminder that not everything he fought for had slipped through his fingers. Evening shadows stretched long across the frozen earth as Henry stood upright. Snowflakes clung to his jacket, melting against the fabric that had been his shield against winter's past. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, not yet. But tonight he had a roof waiting beneath the frozen ground. It was a beginning. A strange, stubborn beginning. Henry took one last look at the barren sky, at the distant glow of Rapid City barely piercing through the dusk. Then he patted Max's head, his voice a quiet promise. "We're home." Max barked once sharp, certain, sealing the pact between a man, a dog, and a forgotten fortress of steel and concrete. And the cold winter night closed around them, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The chill inside the bunker felt different from the cold. Outside, it wasn't just winter that clung to the concrete walls, but decades of silence. The dim yellow glow from the old generator flickered against the curved ceiling. As Henry Walker stood in the middle of the underground room, his thick red and black buffalo-plaid flannel jacket making him look like a misplaced woodsman in an iron tomb built for a war that never came. Max sniffed every corner with careful curiosity, his black and tan coat bristling each time he paused to listen. Henry's boots scraped against the concrete floor as he explored the space more thoroughly, the morning after their first night in the bunker. He moved slowly, still adjusting to the strange hush of a place built to hide from the end of the world. The generator sat in the corner like a rusted mechanical beast that refused to die. A metal bunk, its mattress thin and cracked, stood beneath a vent that rattled with the breath of the wind above. Metal shelves sagged beneath dust-covered survival supplies, canned goods swollen from age, faded first aid kits, and tools so old their handles flaked with rust. He exhaled, breath fogging lightly. "We can make it work," he muttered, mostly to convince himself. Last night, despite the thick wool blankets he had wrapped around himself, sleep came in shards. His mind replayed the sound of distant explosions from memories no winter could bury. Every creak of metal, every gust through the vents made him tense, waiting for danger that wasn't there. It was only Max's steady warmth pressed against his leg that kept him anchored to the present. Max, now alert, stood stiff-tailed and stared toward a section of the far wall. His ears pinned forward, muscles tight with focus. Henry took a step closer, flashlight in hand. He tapped his knuckles against the concrete only to hear a hollow echo ring back. He froze. Concrete wasn't supposed to sound like that. Heart thudding, he traced his gloved hand over faint square-shaped seams, so subtle he'd missed them last night. Weld marks scarred the edges as though something in here had been sealed shut long ago. "What were you hiding?" he whispered to the wall. Max answered with a low growl. That growl wasn't fear. It was a warning. Henry stepped back, forcing a sigh. His instincts as a Marine, the instincts that had kept him alive longer than most, prickled beneath his skin. There was something behind that wall. Something someone had wanted to stay buried. He turned his attention to a steel toolbox sitting crooked on a lower shelf. Inside, beneath brittle newspapers and a cracked flashlight, he discovered a small metal lockbox. It took the better part of 20 minutes before he managed to snap the rusted clasp with a screwdriver. The lid creaked open, and inside Henry found a leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft by time. When he opened it, the smell of aged paper and oil drifted up, the scent of old secrets. On the first page, a name written in neat block letters, Martin Hayes. As Henry read, he formed a picture of the journal's owner, an engineer in his late 30s, precise handwriting that grew shakier with each page, suggesting a once steady mind eroded by fear or guilt. Martin described his role in a government assignment called Project Safeguard, assigned to maintain this bunker during the Cold War. He wrote about shipments arriving in the dead of night trucks with covered cargo and men in suits who spoke in hushed tones. He wrote about being ordered to weld shut an inner chamber behind the bunker wall. And as weeks passed, Martin wrote about strange sounds at night, metal echoing beneath his feet, a low vibration behind the sealed section. Henry swallowed, reading a line twice. They said this place was meant to protect what keeps America alive. But gold does not rot. His breath caught. Gold. He turned the page. The final entries became frantic smudges of ink, rushed strokes, letters uneven, Martin's fear bleeding into every sentence. They sealed the inner vault. Not weapons. Not food. Something else. Something they said must never be moved. Another line smaller, it whispers sometimes. Henry's fingers tightened against the leather. He had heard similar whispers late at night while scanning the perimeter of foreign deserts, where danger lurked just out of sight. He wasn't sure if Martin meant literal sounds or a guilty conscience growing teeth. The last page was written with trembling desperation. What's precious is not above but below. If you find this trust, no one wearing a badge or a suit. They are the only ones who know what was left down here. Henry closed the journal, slowly staring at the hollow wall. Beneath the relentless cold, beneath layers of dust and welded steel, something waited. He felt the bunker pressing in on him, as if the air itself was holding its breath. He sank down onto the metal cot, elbows resting on his knees, journal still clutched in his hands. Max padded over, resting his head on Henry's boot, amber eyes soft but questioning. "You feel it too, don't you?" Henry murmured. Max blinked, tail twitching once. Henry's chest tightened. He wasn't a man drawn to treasure or mystery. All he ever wanted was silence, enough silence to quiet the ghosts of war. But now silence had teeth. Silence wanted to speak. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of every year he had survived beyond the battlefield. He had fought for a country that forgot him, lost friends whose names carved scars into his soul, and carried nightmares that followed him even into the safety of this underground shelter. And now, destiny had handed him a rusted key to a secret some men had died to hide. He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it. But Max nudged him again, insisting life wasn't done with them yet. "All right, Henry," whispered, voice low and determined. "We'll uncover this together. But not today. Not until I'm ready." He patted Max's neck and stood up, gripping the flashlight. The wall waited, cold, silent, holding history hostage. And as Henry switched off the light, letting the bunker drown in darkness, he felt a new fear take root, not from what hid behind the wall, but from the knowledge that he would not be able to ignore it much longer. Something down there was worth burying. Something down there was worth protecting. And Henry Walker, whether he liked it or not, was the man who now stood guard. The bunker felt different now that Henry Walker knew it held more than dust and old military scraps. Knowledge had a way of changing the air, making every sound sharper, every shadow heavier. The hollow wall, the welded seams, the truth behind them, pulled at his curiosity like a hook caught deep in his ribs. Max would not leave that part of the room alone. He paced back and forth, sniffing and growling under his breath, amber eyes fixed on the hidden secret. Henry couldn't tell whether the dog sensed danger or treasure or both. Early the next morning, Henry rolled up his flannel sleeves and studied the faded hand-drawn map from Martin Hayes's journal. The rough sketch showed the bunker's layout from above, most of it matching what Henry could see, but one small section beneath the floor was marked with a bold. A scribbled note beside it read, "Access Panel 3A." Henry crouched, scanning the lower section of the wall behind the generator. There, nearly imperceptible unless you were looking, one metal panel stuck out further than the others. Henry brushed dust from the edges, revealing faint numbers stamped near the corner. 3A, he murmured. His pulse thudded against his ribs. Max sat close, ears perked and tail low with anticipation. "All right, old boy," Henry whispered, fetching a crowbar from the toolbox. "Let's see where this rabbit hole goes." The crowbar's first wedge produced a metallic groan that echoed through the bunker, a sound like a sealed tomb protesting its disturbance. Cold air hissed upward as the corner popped loose, and with a grunt, Henry pried the panel free. Darkness gaped beneath them, hungry and deep. A rusted ladder descended into a void that seemed to have been waiting for him. Henry tied an old rope around his waist, securing the other end to a support beam. His hands trembled not just from cold, but from a feeling he'd almost forgotten, fear seasoned with excitement. "Stay," he whispered firmly to Max. The German shepherd whined but obeyed, paws shifting anxiously on the concrete. With one hand on the flashlight and the other gripping the ladder, Henry began his descent. The air thickened the lower he went, damp, stale, and cold enough to fill his lungs with frost. When his boots finally hit solid ground, he stood in a chamber no bigger than a garage, its walls lined with metal plates and grime. In the center loomed a circular vault door 5 feet wide with a wheel lock encrusted in rust. Carved along its rim were numbers, dates he recognized from Martin's final pages. Maybe the last day workers stepped foot down here. Maybe the day something was sealed forever. Henry placed a gloved hand on the wheel, hesitated, aware that whatever he opened could alter the quiet life he hoped for, and then pushed with slow, determined strength. At first it resisted like a creature clinging to its sleep. Then, with a series of painful screeches, the lock gave way. A puff of ancient air escaped, stale and heavy with metallic tang. Henry lifted his flashlight, revealing rows upon rows of wooden crates, stacked neatly along the walls. Dust covered them like a burial shroud, but the letters stenciled on each crate still showed through U.S. Treasury. Federal property. Do not open. Henry's throat tightened. He stumbled closer, brushing his light across the crates. Hundreds, maybe more, all sealed untouched. His curiosity overwhelmed fear. Using a pry bar he'd strapped to his belt, he wedged open the nearest lid. Wood splintered. Light caught dull surfaces, bars smooth and heavy, wrapped in waxed paper. Hands shaking slightly, Henry unwrapped the corner of one. Gold. Solid, heavy, real. He lifted it. Its weight shocked him more than he imagined a single bar could carry. Beneath lay stacks of old government bonds, perfectly preserved, as if someone always intended to return. But no one had. His heart pounded at the enormity of it. He'd been counting coins for gas and sleeping in the cold, while millions, no tens of millions, sat here sealed away from the world. For a moment, greed tempted him. A single bar could change his life forever. No more sleeping in trucks, no more counting dollars. He could buy Max the best food money could afford, heck, even build him a house of his own. But greed wasn't alone in that room. There was guilt too dark and familiar, whispering that comfort was a privilege others had died without. He found a metal box tucked behind the nearest stack. Inside was an envelope sealed with brittle red wax. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable for the one who finds this. Henry slid his thumb under the seal. A single sheet of paper unfolded. This wealth was never meant for safety. It was meant for men who already had too much and feared losing it. I knew they buried greed here under the guise of protection. Do not let this rot the world above. Please do what I could not. Do what is right. Signed, Martin Hayes. Henry stared at the letter long after he finished reading. Martin's desperation bled through every word. The engineer hadn't been guarding treasure. He'd been guarding humanity from the consequences of it. Max barked above his voice, echoing through the panel. Henry startled, gripping a gold bar like a weapon. It's okay, he called back, though his voice trembled. Standing in the vault, surrounded by wealth that could destroy or save, Henry understood the weight of what he held. War had taken much from him, friends, family, parts of himself he would never get back. It left him hardened and cynical, believing the world only rewarded those willing to take. But now he was the only thing standing between this gold and whoever once tried to bury it in darkness. He replaced the bar, closed the crate, and forced himself to breathe through the storm of emotion pounding in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt not like a broken veteran surviving on scraps, but like a guardian at the edge of something sacred. He climbed back up, boots striking each rung with purpose. Max met him at the top, licking Henry's glove as though checking he was still whole. Henry knelt and pressed his forehead lightly against Max's. This isn't just about us anymore, he whispered. Max wagged his tail once, leaning closer. Henry hauled the panel back into place, hiding the darkness again. But secrets once awakened do not go quiet easily. Henry set the generator humming once more and sank onto the metal cot with the journal open on his lap. His gaze drifted to the wall. The bunker was no longer merely shelter, it was a crossroads. Below him lay enough power to twist the world's moral spine. Above him lay the winter and a life that promised nothing. And there, in the space between, stood Henry Walker, haunted soldier, turned reluctant guardian, holding the weight of a choice that would echo far beyond the cold concrete walls. Snow fell in restless spirals across the clearing above the bunker, a silent warning carried on the wind. Henry Walker sensed the change before anything happened, an instinct sharpened by decades of war and years of survival. He had covered the secret panel beneath the generator and forced himself not to look at it again that day, but Max never truly relaxed. The German shepherd's ears kept twitching, nose always pointed at the sealed access below a low rumble deep in his chest, as if he could smell danger rising through the steel. Late afternoon light bruised the horizon purple as Henry stepped out into the cold, with Max trotting close to his leg. He was clearing snow from around the hatch, busy work, to keep his mind from drowning in temptation, when headlights flickered between the pines. A sleek black SUV eased into the clearing, its engine humming too smoothly for mountain roads. It bore no plate on the front illegal in South Dakota. Henry straightened, wiping flakes from his flannel jacket. Max planted himself by Henry's side, muscles taut. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out, wrapped in a long black wool coat that looked too expensive for these parts. He appeared to be in his early 50s, his silver-streaked black hair slicked back neatly. His face was lean and sharply angled, the kind of face shaped by ambition and very little sleep. His gloves were spotless, his posture composed, and his shoes polished to a mirrored shine sank awkwardly into the soft snow. He walked with the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Walker the stranger called his voice smooth as cold oil. He extended a hand. Matthew Reed, Federal Historical Asset Recovery Division. The title sounded official enough, but even his introduction felt rehearsed. Henry shook his hand briefly. Matthew's grip was firm but strangely emotionless, like a man trained to mimic warmth rather than feel it. "Mind if I take a look at the property?" Matthew asked, gaze sharp as frost. Henry stood between him and the hatch. "You got a warrant?" Matthew offered a thin smile as if he didn't appreciate the question. He reached into his coat and displayed a leather folder embossed with a federal insignia. The credentials inside looked too right. Pristine. Untouched by time or fieldwork. "We have reason to believe the Montgomery bunker contains government-owned items from the mid-Cold War period," Matthew said. "Sensitive items. Possibly stolen or misplaced." Henry shrugged. "All I've seen is dust and regret." Matthew's lips twitched slightly, but his eyes stayed cold and calculating. "Maybe something jogs your memory later." He handed Henry a card, plain white, just a phone number printed in black. "If you find anything unusual, call me." He turned to leave his coat swirling behind him like a passing storm. But before stepping into the SUV, Matthew paused and looked back. "A word of advice, Mr. Walker. Secrets like this, they never stay buried. Best to trust the right people." Then he was gone, the SUV slipping into the trees like a predator returning to the dark. Henry felt Max press against his leg, seeking comfort, or giving it, he wasn't sure. He slipped the card into his pocket and muttered, "Danger wears fancy shoes, huh?" Max responded with a single warning bark directed at the forest. That night, Henry couldn't rest. Snow drifted from the vents above, and the generator hummed a nervous heartbeat into the bunker air. He sat at the table pretending to read Martin's final entries again, but his eyes kept straying to the access panel, to the invisible weight of gold below. Max suddenly rose, hackles up. He moved to the ladder and stared, body rigid. "What is it, boy?" Henry asked, already grabbing his flashlight and rifle. A distant crunch of tires over frozen soil answered him. Someone was back. Not bothering with introductions this time. Henry killed the generator, plunging the bunker into darkness, so total he could taste it. Footsteps circled above. Voices low, urgent, a language Henry didn't recognize. The scrape of metal tools on the hatch. At least 3 men. Maybe 4. Professionals. Max growled, deep and furious. "Quiet," Henry whispered. Max obeyed, but his fury vibrated through the air, like thunder waiting to strike. The hatch shuddered. Screws clinked onto concrete. Then slowly the lid eased open. A masked head appeared, peering into the black. Henry moved first. He flicked his flashlight on beam, blinding the man, while Max launched upward with a snarling roar. The intruder screamed as Max latched onto his arm, dragging him partially into the bunker. "Get him off," another voice hissed. Henry fired a warning shot into the air. The blast ricocheted thunder through the confined space. "You picked the wrong hole to crawl into," he barked, voice commanding as it once had been overseas. The intruders retreated in a scramble of curses and panic. Max released and returned to Henry's heel, teeth-bared, chest heaving. The hatch slammed shut from above. Then silence. A car engine roared, tires spinning through ice in a desperate exit. It was over as quickly as it had begun. Henry snapped the bolts back in place and leaned against the hatch, breath shaking with adrenaline. Max whimpered once, not fear, but readiness for the next fight. Henry stroked the dog's head. "Good boy. You saved our hides." Minutes later, sirens wailed through the forest, red and blue lights splashing across the clearing as Rapid City authorities arrived. Henry climbed out cautiously as Sheriff Bill Harris stepped forward, one hand near the grip of his sidearm. Bill was in his late 50s with a stocky build, a thick gray beard, dark leathery skin from decades of plains weather, and eyes that held exhaustion and sincerity in equal measure. He wore a sheriff's parka patched at the elbows, the badge dented from long service. Bill had served in Desert Storm, Shorter wore different scars, and he carried himself like a man who had buried too many brothers. "Henry," Bill said, lowering his weapon when he saw Max sitting calmly beside him. "You planning to start a war out here?" Henry shook his head. "They came looking for something." Bill crouched, inspecting blood droplets in the snow and crushed cigarette butts, foreign brand, unfamiliar markings. "These aren't kids from town," Bill muttered. Then he lifted his eyes to Henry's battered but unbroken posture, the rifle in his hands, the unmistakable war hardness in his gaze. Bill stepped close, voice lowered. "I won't ask what's down there, but I want you to listen clear, Walker." His breath steamed in the cold as he spoke the truth only a soldier could deliver. "Whoever those men are, they ain't flying any flag you or I fought for." Henry nodded once. Sheriff Harris gave Max a gentle pat, then looked toward the darkness beyond the trees, the direction danger had fled, but would inevitably return from. "I'll file this as attempted burglary," he said, "but they'll come back. And they won't stop just because you put a dog on one of them." Henry swallowed, his gloved hand tightening into Max's fur. He thought back to the vault, the gold, the warning, and the price of knowing too much. "I'll be ready," Henry said quietly. Bill held his gaze for a beat, then nodded and left Henry alone in the snow with the dog who would fight to the last breath for him. The wind howled across the clearing, carrying with it a message etched in ice. The secret was awake, and now so was the world hunting for it. Winter clung to Rapid City like a vow that refused to be forgotten. Snow still swallowed the clearing above the bunker, but now Henry Walker understood that the cold wasn't the only thing hunting him. Every instinct sharpened by war screamed that gold, more dangerous than any weapon, had already cast its shadow far beyond these concrete walls. After the break-in, Henry barely slept. He sat on the metal cot with Max pressed against his knee, one hand buried in the dog's thick black and tan fur. The dim light from the generator flickered and danced over his red and black buffalo-plaid flannel jacket, turning the old fabric into a banner of stubborn survival. The room smelled like old metal and worry. Henry stared at the journal on the table, Martin Hayes's final plea, echoing in his mind. Do what is right. But what was right when you had nothing, when you had been thrown away by the world you once fought for? The gold represented a future filled with warmth, comfort, and dignity. Yet he knew enough about greed to recognize its poison. He had seen men destroy villages over lies and coins. He had watched governments trade young soldiers like ammunition. Gold could make a man powerful, but it could also turn him into a target until the moment he stopped breathing. Max shifted and nuzzled his wrist, reminding him that he wasn't alone in fate or choice. You always know, Henry whispered. Max thumped his tail, once solemn approval. When morning arrived, pale light leaked through the vents like a reluctant promise. Henry stood and buttoned his flannel jacket, feeling the familiar weight of duty settle in. He locked the vault door below, then welded the access panel shut from the bunker side, sealing the treasure beneath steel and secrecy once more. But he couldn't simply walk away, not without leaving something good behind. He packed a few of the most easily redeemable treasury bonds inside the lining of his jacket. They were small, but valuable enough to matter without drawing immediate suspicion. He turned off the generator and opened the hatch, letting fresh air rush in like a rebirth. Max bounded up the ladder ahead of him, paws skidding on the snowy concrete. We're leaving it all behind, Henry muttered as he pulled the hatch closed for what he hoped would be the final time. All except the part that counts. It wasn't long before he found help in the only place that understood him, the veterans' community. Sheriff Bill Harris put him in touch with someone he trusted. Helen Parker, a young volunteer attorney who worked tirelessly with homeless veterans. Helen was in her early 30s with sun-kissed skin and a cascade of wavy brown hair she usually tied into a loose ponytail. Her eyes, hazel and kind, carried the gentle strength of someone who had chosen to heal instead of judge. She wore thick sweaters and jeans that looked one size too big, as if she often forgot her own needs while taking care of others. When Helen first met Henry at a small table in the back of a diner, she studied him with a blend of caution and compassion. Sheriff Harris says you've got something that can help people, she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Henry nodded, choosing his words like stepping stones over thin ice. He didn't tell her everything, not the vault, not the gold, but enough to explain he had funds belonging to nobody who deserved them. Helen leaned back, lips parting in surprise. Most people would have run with the money. Most people would have given in to the dream of wealth. But here was a man with nothing choosing differently. You want the money to go to other veterans and pets, she asked, peeking down at Max, resting his chin protectively on Henry's boot. Animals like him helped a lot of us come home. Even when nobody else did, Henry answered quietly. Max's ears perked as if he agreed wholeheartedly. Helen smiled, a soft, bright thing that chased away Henry's lingering doubt. She helped him open a small, charitable trust under an anonymous name. Every form she filed, Every signature she guided him through, she treated with the seriousness of something sacred. Because it was. The trust funded 2 projects: affordable veterinary care and emergency housing assistance for homeless veterans. Within months, a piece of land on the edge of Rapid City became something new. Construction workers paid by state support and volunteer donations built a modest mobile home and a small clinic, re-insulating the walls to withstand harsh winters. The place didn't look like much from afar, just a single-story building, fresh paint, a simple sign. Shelter Paws Clinic. But inside lived hope. People started arriving slowly, a limping golden retriever rescued from an abandoned shed, a veteran struggling to stay warm, then another and another. Henry didn't greet them with speeches or heroism. He swept floors, he fed dogs, he fixed a broken fence, he shoveled snow from the ramp out front. And every so often, he quietly paid someone's rent or bought a bag of pet food through the trust Helen safeguarded. Sheriff Bill visited, often dropping off donations from the community: dog blankets, canned food, winter boots. Helen handled finances and paperwork, ensuring nobody traced the funds back to Henry. The old veteran never bragged, never hinted at the truth. He walked the grounds wearing the same plaid flannel jacket that had weathered both war zones and winters. People came to know him simply as the quiet old dog guy. He liked it that way. Max, meanwhile, became a legend of his own, guardian of dogs and humans alike. Children giggled as he trotted by. Wounded veterans smiled when he rested his head on their knees. He had fought in darkness, but now he patrolled light. As time passed, Henry grew older. His joints creaked louder than the bunker doors ever had. His beard turned more white than gray. But his eyes softened. At sunset, he would sit in a wooden chair on the porch, Max lying beside him, both watching the horizon turn gold, not the kind you could hold, not the kind that rots, the kind that heals. Only a few Bill and Helen knew that beneath miles of cold earth, an untouched fortune still slept. A secret heavy enough to crack civilizations if disturbed. Henry had instructions locked away with Helen's files, sealed documents to be opened only after his death, a map, a warning, and a reminder of what greed tries to bury. What he buried that winter was a threat. What he salvaged was meaning. And the townsfolk who visited the clinic never asked why he stayed. They simply accepted that a weary old veteran had found his purpose in a snowy corner of South Dakota, with a loyal German shepherd always at his side. Henry often joked to visitors, bought a stupid old bunker for $700 and somehow ended up staying. But in truth, he hadn't stayed because of the bunker at all. He stayed for Max, stayed for the people, stayed for the version of himself he thought was lost somewhere in a dusty war. The gold slept beneath an artificial grave. Greed suffocated there, sealed forever. But above, a different kind of treasure lived on, breathing, laughing, healing, a quiet testament that the greatest riches are the ones we choose to protect, not possess. When an old veteran in a worn buffalo plaid jacket walked into a forgotten bunker with nothing but a loyal dog and a final $700 in his pocket, no one expected a miracle. But sometimes God plants blessings not in the places that sparkle, but in the cold, buried corners of life where hope seems lost. Henry didn't find his salvation in gold. He found it in purpose, in service, and in the love of a faithful companion who never left his side. Maybe the lesson is this: miracles don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes they rise from the choices we make, from choosing kindness over comfort, courage over greed, faith over fear. And when we give what little we have to help another soul, heaven notices. If this story touched your heart today, don't keep its light to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and let us know if you believe that God still works quietly through loyal hearts, wagging tails, and second chances. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community for more stories of redemption and love that warm even the coldest winter nights. May the Lord bless you, guide you, and remind you that you are never too lost for God to find and never too broken for Him to heal.